Cool. All right, so at the beginning of this year, first Friday of the January, we started a new series seeking to dig deeper into the character of Christ. Maybe you remember. Our focus has been to look deeper into the Bible to gain a better understanding of who Jesus is. Mainly, what is he like? What is his characteristics? Who is this Jesus that Christians come to worship? Why? Does anyone remember why we want to dig deeper into the character of Christ? Or maybe, if you don't remember why we said, what's one helpful thing that might come out of digging deeper into the character of Christ? What would you say? Anybody? Makes you want to follow him more. Marcos, I saw a little hand up.
Jesus, the whole Bible is basically built around Jesus, so it kind of gives you a meaning.
Yeah. So, the Bible is all about Jesus. The Old Testament doesn't explicitly mention his name. It's arguable. But it is all about Jesus, even the Old Testament. And in order to know what the Bible is saying, if you want to study the Bible, you're going to study about Jesus. And the deeper we get to know about Jesus, the more inclined our hearts will be to want to follow him. And so that's our hope. That's why we began this journey. That's why we really come every Sunday, to be honest with you. That's why we come every Friday. Studying Jesus specifically isn't... Yeah, you get the point. It's why we come anyway, right? But we're focusing specifically on Christ in order to have more reasons to be able to trust in him. That's how relationships work, right? A lot of times, you might have heard this, right? Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship, right? It's a very common thing that people say. It's because we're relating to the God who created us. The more we get to know someone, the more we grow in an understanding of their character, the more reason we have to trust in them. The more reason we have to give our whole lives to them, right? That's true of your best friends now. That's true of friends you will meet down the road. Jesus comes to you and me and calls us to trust in him with every single area of our lives. There's no human in this world that will ask you to trust him with every single area of your life. Jesus comes and does that. Every single area of your life. And that's a costly call. So it's going to help us to know who it is that's calling us to follow him with every single area of our lives if we really can and should trust him. So today we're going to look at yet another aspect of Jesus, who he is. And I want to frame today with an overarching question. It's the same thing that I brought up right before we sang, "Come behold the wondrous mystery." Have you ever wondered why Jesus had to come as a man? Or have you ever wondered why Jesus chose to come as a man? Being God, having the ability to do all that he pleases, having the ability to save the world from sin in any other way he chooses, why did he choose to come as a man? Just want you to think about that and let that be the on your back burners, as they say. I have a joke for you guys. How does Moses from the Bible, how does Moses make his coffee? You're halfway there. No, I'm serious. No.
He didn't have coffee because coffee didn't exist?
No.
Coffee existed.
That might be true. I don't know. How does Moses make his coffee? Sungwoo?
Half and half.
No. So I wasn't kidding. Caleb. Okay, yes? He hits it with, that's a good try. Yes, Paul? Huh? He brews it. You were halfway there. Moses, he brews it. He brews it. We're going to be in the book of Hebrews today, so turn to Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. He brews it, yes. That was good, Paul. That was good. But striking it with a rock, that's good too. Striking coffee beans with, I like that. That's my next favorite answer, right? He brews it. Caleb, you were halfway there. So close. All right, so turn with me. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. Hebrews 4, 14 through 16. That's in the New Testament. Yeah, it's in Hebrews is a New Testament book, okay? All right. So before we get into this text, it's going to be helpful to gain, at the very least, a very basic understanding about what this book is about. Mainly, why was Hebrews written? Why was Hebrews written? Or should I say, why was Hebrews preached? Though we now have the solid book of Hebrews in your Bible in the New Testament, it's believed that Hebrews was actually first a sermon that was preached to an early church that was predominantly made up of Jewish Christians. At that time, in addition to the struggles that you and I face living on earth and living in a broken world, these Jewish Christians faced immense persecution for their faith, their newfound faith in Christ. And it was so intense that there was an increasing temptation to be like, dude, is it even worth being a Christian in this world anymore? We could just give up our ways, go back to the old ways, and these people will leave us alone. That was a temptation for a lot of these Christians back then. And arguably for us today, it's getting more and more harder to be a Christian in our world. Hebrews was written with one primary aim, to remind these Christians that Jesus is better. Jesus is better. And the implied overall command of the whole book, if you read from the first chapter to the last, is because we know and we have come to believe that Jesus is better, we ought to remain firm in our faith. We shouldn't go back to the old ways that were actually pointing to Jesus. We should keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and keep running the race. Keep our eyes on the prize. Even in the midst of affliction, in the suffering, because hope is what they hoped in something they actually believed, even though they cannot see it. You and I know that this life is really hard, and some of you guys might not have experienced the hardships of life yet, and some of you have, and some of you had to a even bigger degree than others have, right? But this life is hard, and this world is a hard place to live in. But I would also argue, and the Bible would also say, life as a Christian is in many ways even harder. And Jesus never sugarcoats that. But in Jesus, we not only have a clear purpose in this life, we have a hope that cannot be taken away from us or destroyed. In Jesus, we have someone we can confidently walk with, or know that will confidently walk with us in this life, and who promises also eternal life with him. This is the general context, the aim of the entire book of Hebrews. Jesus is better, so keep following him. Keep following him. So with that said, let's jump into the text for today. It's Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. And let me read it for y'all now. Hebrews chapter 4, 14 through 16. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. What does this all mean? Verse 14 tells us that we have a great high priest. For people with a good knowledge of the Old Testament, and the people back then in this context, remember Jewish Christians, this concept came pretty easy to them. It was very understandable, but maybe not so much for us. So it's going to be helpful for us to take a moment to break that down. What is a high priest? Does anybody know? Yes, Marley?
It was like the priest of the high temple.
It was a priest of the high temple, okay? Anything else? That's true. Yes, Noah? Yes, that is the primary responsibility of the high priest. And Noah hit it right on the head, hit the nail on the head. Do you want to add something to that, CJ?
The high priest is the leader of the religion. Like, they are the head of it.
That is also true. The high priest, similar to what Marley said, is in charge of the other priests, is the head of the religion. So they are seen as the face of the religion. The main responsibility of the high priest, as Noah just said, is once a year on the Day of Atonement, which is the 10th day of the 7th month of every year, the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, which is a space that's blocked off from all other people, offer a sacrifice for their own sins because the high priests themselves were themselves sinners. And then they would offer sacrifices for the sins of the people once every year to atone for their sins. Does that role of the high priest sound familiar in any way to you guys? Does that sound familiar to you in any way? You said it, Chris.
He said, bro, that's what Jesus did.
He said, bro, that's what Jesus did. And bro, that is what Jesus did. I hope it sounds familiar because that is exactly that office of the high priest, in addition to at that time before Jesus came, atoning for the sacrifices of sin in that way, which God commanded, it pointed to what Jesus would do once and for all. Remember, the Hebrews' main theme is Jesus is better. The past consisted of many high priests, all of whom who died and all of whom themselves were sinners. But Jesus is the great high priest. Though he had no sins of which he had to atone for himself, he died for the sins of man, he rose from the dead, and furthermore, he ascended into heaven. And that's what it means in verse 14 when it says that Jesus passed through the heavens. It's another way to say that he rose from the dead and he ascended into heaven, and now he's seated at the right hand of the Father. Jesus isn't only the great high priest because he had no sins and because he rose from the dead. He is the great high priest because his payment for our sins was sufficient once for all. After Jesus did what he did on earth, it ended the need for God's people to go to the temple to offer sacrifices for their sins. It ended the need for the high priest once a year to enter the Holy of Holies to offer sacrifices for sins for themselves and then for the people of God. And now in heaven, Jesus, as the great high priest, is interceding for those who would come to him for forgiveness. I'm getting somewhere with this, guys, okay? This means that like the high priest would stand before God offering sacrifices for the sins of the people of God, Jesus now, like Chris said, stands before God the Father pleading our case for mercy because of the final sacrifice that he made on the cross for the sins of man. I know it's a lot of information, but it's actually really important that we get this. So I hope you at least got a little bit of bits and pieces there, right? So being the great high priest and all, okay, you would think that Jesus is very unapproachable, unreachable. Or to flip it around, you would think that he would be very distant from us. But look what it says about Jesus, the great high priest. Verse 15, if you look with me there, it says that we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with us. Or to put it in the positive, we have a high priest who is able to sympathize with us. Now, before we go any further, I think it will be helpful to define what that text means here when it says sympathize. In our language today, sympathize typically means to show pity for or to feel sorry for. To be honest, it doesn't really sound that strong. It almost makes it seem like Jesus just feels bad for us, even though that might be genuine. And that's it. It makes it seem like he's very detached and he's very distant, especially because he's in the heavens after all, right? Who would he know? How would he know my problems? Raise your hand if you know Taylor Swift.
No.
Yeah.
Kelsey, she got married.
All right. Taylor Swift. All right, listen up, guys.
Well, I'm just texting.
Taylor Swift is, y'all with me here? 2023 Time Magazine's Person of the Year. Yeah. And like I said, there's a good chance if you don't know her, you either don't have internet or you're, yes.
I got an image of her.
That's okay. Good. So most recently, all right, guys, maybe I shouldn't use Taylor Swift. It's a little distracting. Just be with me here, okay? Most recently, she has been showing up a lot because she's been at all the football games that the Chiefs play at and because she's dating Travis Kelce. And most of the time you see her shown on TV, if you're watching the games, she's up in this private booth like this. It's indoors, it's heated, and it's guarded by a whole lot of security, okay? A few weeks back, there was one game that the Chiefs played against the Miami Dolphins, and it was below 0 degrees, freezing temperatures. It was so cold that fans actually got frostbite and hypothermia while attending the game. To be exact, 15 people were hospitalized mid-game because it was so cold. But you know who didn't get frostbite that day? Taylor Swift. And it's not a knock on her privilege. She gets to do that. And that's good for her, right? But I think her being Time Person of the Year, and I think genuinely she must be a good person. She must have at least thought about the people that were sitting outside when this is a real photo of that day. It's so cold that the windows there were freezing up, okay? She probably thought at some point at that day, oh my goodness, it's so cold. I'm inside and I'm wearing a jacket and a beanie. It must be so bad out there for the people. She probably felt bad, and I think it was a genuine concern. But she was in her private booth. I want to ask you, is that the kind of sympathy that Jesus has for you and me?
No.
Distant, isolated, in his private booth in heaven above.
No.
Like Marley said, it's not, absolutely not. So what does it mean that Jesus is able to sympathize with us? In the original language, the sympathy of Christ means that he is a co-sufferer. It means that he suffers with us. This means that in our suffering, Jesus is able to deeply feel what we feel. He suffers with us as if his suffering or that suffering is his own. And not only is he able to co-suffer with you and me, he actually desires to do so. And he loves to do so, and that's the reason why he came. I want to ask you guys a question. Have you ever had a friend who is able to co-suffer with you? Have you ever had parents ever co-suffer with you when you were going through a really hard time? Have you ever had someone who felt your pain so deeply that they actually cried with you and tried to enter into that suffering with you? Or felt your struggle so hard that they came alongside with you to fight with you in this struggle? Some of you may already know this, but if you don't, for the past few years, I've myself battled with some pretty intense anxiety and depression. And in the most intense times of that suffering, which I hope none of you ever have to deal with, I know some of you are, I can't tell you how many times Carolyn has co-suffered with me. And as much as Carolyn is God's gift to me when I'm really going through it, without her, I really wouldn't even be a youth director right now. She has limits, and she doesn't exactly know how I feel to the depths of it. She tries, and she does a really good job at it, but she doesn't feel the heaviness of some mornings when I can't seem to really get myself out of bed just because I don't want to go through the day. She doesn't really know what it feels like to feel paralyzed with just doing something as simple as preparing a sermon because I'm so anxious to even get started. Jesus reaches out to us and tells us that he is able to sympathize with us. Though he is holy, set apart in heaven, Jesus is actually able to sympathize with you and me better than anyone else can. I know that kind of sounds very trite, right? It sounds like, yeah, well, of course, yeah, we know that God can do that. Yeah. I know that. But how? How can we say that? How can Jesus know what I'm feeling? How would Jesus know what I'm feeling when I'm feeling really, really down in the dumps? How does Jesus know what I'm going through when I'm struggling with my body image? How does Jesus know the depth of my darkness and my dark thoughts that if anyone else knew, they would think I'm crazy? Or the feeling of being trapped in my anxieties and my depression? How can he know the depths of my fears for the future, especially when I feel like I'm not doing well in school or when I'm not meeting up to all the standards of the people around me and they seem to be getting ahead? How can he know what it feels like when my friends have ditched me? How can he know? How does Jesus know what I'm going through in my body and my mind? Verse 15 goes on to tell us that he is able to sympathize with us because he has been tempted in every respect as we are. And this brings us to the overarching question that we asked in the beginning. Why did Jesus choose to become a man? He's God after all, right? Why not just get rid of sin the way that you would imagine anyone that could just be like, okay, boom, get rid of it, right? Why in the world would he step down into the world? Jesus was tempted in every respect as we are, and he was tempted in the flesh, in a physical body, as a man, in a sinful world, experiencing the full brokenness of the effects of sin, some of which you guys have already endured through, maybe some of you. Earlier in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 through 18, it says that Jesus himself likewise partook of the same things that we have. I love this. It literally says Jesus has partook in the same things that we have. One reason he chose to become man was to help us to partake in our suffering. The verses go on to say in Hebrews chapter 2 that Jesus had to be made like his brothers and sisters in every respect, meaning in every which way, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted themselves. And about this text, Dane Ortland says this: the reason that Jesus is in such close solidarity with us is that the difficult path that we are on is not unique to us. Jesus has journeyed on it himself. It is not only that Jesus can relieve us from our troubles, like a doctor prescribing medicine, it is also that before any relief comes, he's able with us in our troubles. He is with us in our troubles like a doctor who has endured the same disease. This is the Savior that we have. This is the God that came to save us, one who was willing to step down from glory, be made like us in every respect, and experience the mess of a sin-filled world firsthand, personally. Jesus didn't have to experience any of the things that we have to experience as humans, but he did. He experienced what it feels like to be hungry. He experienced what it feels like to have pimples, to have a bad hair day, to be rejected by his closest friends, to be hated by people, to be rejected by his own family, to be treated as second. He experienced loneliness beyond what you and I could ever know, and he experienced physical pain that you and I feel. He personally experienced the suffering that comes with the realities, again, of living in this broken world. Do you believe that? Do you believe that Jesus is able to sympathize with you? He's able to co-suffer with you. And not just because he is a God and God can do anything, though that is true too, but because he willingly stepped into our world as a man to suffer the things common to us, and then to suffer a death that he did not deserve, all for your sake, all for my sake. The next time you read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, try to focus on the humanity of Jesus. The details might be very small, but they point to a greater reality, mainly that God can sympathize with us because he became like us. This is the kind of God that we have in Jesus. This is the one who is calling us to trust in him with every area of our lives, to follow him. One who would choose to experience suffering for the sake of the ones he not only created, but ones whom he deeply loves. Verse 15 goes on to say another thing that's actually very, very important here. It says, we have a high priest who is able to sympathize with our weaknesses, one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, so he's tempted as we are in every respect, but different from us. He's yet without sin. Question: if Jesus had no sin, is it truly possible that he could really say that he can sympathize with us in every way? How can one who is sinless understand the heart of someone who is sinful? Sorry, is that there's someone banging their bottle? It's all right, Caleb. It's precisely because Jesus was in every respect tempted as we were, yet he did not sin, that he can actually sympathize with us more deeply, and he can actually help us in our sin. Let me explain this, okay? So the first thing is, his sinlessness is the reason why he is able to sympathize with us more deeply. I want you to think about this for a second, okay? Because it makes a lot of sense. Jesus was tempted in every respect as we are, and he never gave in to sin, right? This means that he knows the full strength beyond what any human will ever know of how strong temptation can go. Think of it like levels in a game. I know even if you don't play any games that everyone knows how games work. Level 1, typically pretty easy, right? Someone who is on level 1 will never know the hardship of someone who is on level 17. Someone who is on level 17 will never know how challenging and hard that level is as someone on level 58, and so on and so forth. Someone who was tempted in every respect, yet never gave in even one time, not only beat the game, but fully knows how hard it is to resist or overcome every temptation known to man. That's Jesus. Dane Ortland says, Jesus' sinlessness means that he knows temptation better than we ourselves do. Jesus never lay down. He endured all our temptations and testings without ever giving in. He therefore knows the strength of temptation better than any of us. Only he knows the true cost. The second thing is, his sinlessness is the reason why he's actually qualified to help us in the first place. Think about that one for a moment. If Jesus himself had sinned, he wouldn't be qualified to help us in our sin. He wouldn't be able to take on the wrath of God for our sake because he himself deserves the wrath of God, right? Kind of makes a lot of sense there. Going back to the game analogy, if I'm stuck on level 1 with 1 life left before I'm gone forever, I'm for sure not going to look for someone else that's on level 1 to help me get out of level 1. Level 2, maybe, that might be a little bit of a better bet. But if I see that there's one who not only beat the game, but did so flawlessly, without any error, that's the one I'm looking to save me. That's the one I'm going to. That's the one I'm following. That's the one I'm looking to teach me about how to get out of this. Listen to Dane Ortland one more time. He says this: our sinless high priest is not one who needs rescue, but who provides it. He himself is not trapped in the hole of sin with us. He alone can pull us out. Not only can he alone pull us out of the hole of sin, he alone desires to climb in and bear our burdens. Jesus is able to sympathize. He co-suffers with us. Like I said before, this is the Savior that we have. This is Jesus. This is our God. This is who Jesus is. And in light of the fact that Jesus is able to sympathize with us, I want to leave you guys with 2 simple takeaways. Very simple takeaways. Remember, the first one is, let us hold fast to our confession. That's literally just taken right from verse 14. Let us hold fast to our confessions. Remember, the original sermon, the book of Hebrews, was given to Jewish Christians who were enduring sufferings of all kinds on top of the sufferings that were common to man. They suffered persecution for their faith. Everything in and around them was working to get them to take their eyes off the only hope that was steadfast and sure, Jesus Christ. Though most of these Jewish Christians had not seen Jesus in the flesh, this book was written about 30 to 40 years after Jesus had ascended, they came to believe in him. They came to trust in him and to follow him no matter the cost for them. Now, I want to ask you guys this. When you look around in this world and in your own lives, when you look to the realities of the brokenness in this world and in your own lives, I know some of you guys experience this to another level of the brokenness and sin. I want to ask you guys to think about this. What hope do you have? What hope do you have in that moment when you're suffering to the deepest point? What hope is there for you? Time and time again, we will be pushed to take our eyes off of Christ. But remember, Jesus is better. He has proven this to us by coming to us in the midst of the brokenness and suffering for our sake to save us and to give us hope in this life and in the one to come. He is trustworthy. If you have already committed to following Christ, I want to plead with you to keep holding on to your confession. Keep holding on. If you have not, I want to plead with you to consider Christ. What other hope is offered to you that's eternal? Second point, again, comes from verse 16. Let us then with confidence draw near to him. And this is what we'll end with. Verse 16 says, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. You and I can draw near to Jesus fully expecting that he will not reject you, fully knowing that he understands you and is able to sympathize with you. You and I can draw near to Jesus fully expecting that he fully knows what you need and is fully able and willing to help you in those needs. I plead with you to keep your eyes on him and keep following him. maybe you don't know what that looks like or where to begin. And if that's you, please come talk to me or come talk to your leaders. Come talk to any of the leaders here. Leaders in the small groups, feel free to share your phone number. Sometimes texting is an easier medium. If you don't know what it looks like to turn to Christ or follow him, or if you think you want to, you feel your heart pulling at that, but you don't know what to do, don't just leave it at that and just kind of go on with your life. Reach out to someone. Reach out to me, to any of the leaders here. We'd love to talk more about that. Hope you would consider Christ and, again, have another reason to know this is why Christ came in the flesh. Christ came in the flesh to experience what you and I experience, and not only deal with it, but so he could empathize and sympathize with you in your pain. Let's pray.